obviously, I think you will introduce yourself better than I would. So, Zoe, perhaps starting with you, please give us an introduction about what you are, what you're working on, your mission, and your focus on humane education.
Great. Thank you, Raya, so much. And hello, everybody. So, the Institute for Humane Education is built around a very simple premise that a just, humane, and sustainable world is possible, and that the most strategic way to achieve a world in which all beings, human, non human, and the ecosystems that support life can thrive is through education. And to narrow it down really as simply as possible, we believe that we need to educate a generation of what we call solutionaries. And solutionaries are people who can identify unsustainable, unjust, and inhumane systems and then transform them in ways that they become sustainable and healthy for everyone. And solutionaries also strive to support systems that do the most good and the least harm to people, animals, and the environment. So, how does one go about being a solutionary? Well, the first thing is to bring a solutionary lens to the problems that we face in the world and the challenges that are all around us. So, using that lens, solutionaries see that problems can be solved. They invite the perspectives of others. They focus on solutions rather than on debating and choosing sides. They recognize that problems don't exist in isolation. They seek collaboration and they look for ways to ensure that no people, animals, or ecosystems are harmed by the solutions that they come up with. And then the last thing that I would say about how we educate people to be solutionaries before ending this sort of intro and then moving on to the conversation is that solutionaries cultivate solutionary thinking. So it's not enough to just bring a solutionary lens to problems. We have to think like solutionaries. And solutionary thinking is comprised of many kinds of thinking, but primarily critical thinking, systems thinking, strategic thinking, and creative thinking. And even though thinking doesn't happen in this linear way, critical thinking really is the foundation for the rest. Without the ability to distinguish fact from opinion, to be able to identify misinformation and disinformation and know what is true, we can't become effective systems thinkers. And without critical and systems thinking, we can't become effective strategic thinkers. And without all three working together, we won't have the ability to think creatively about the solutions that we need to develop in order to create a world where we can all survive and thrive. And the last thing that I'll say about us is that we strive to educate people at a variety of levels, from loads of free resources on our website, humaneeducation.org, to all the way up to graduate programs, including a doctorate in humane education that's offered through Antioch University, all online, and lots in between that I'm sure I'll get to when we start the conversation. So thank you, Raya.
Amazing. Thank you, Zoe. And for those of you who are educators in our audience, do check out the Institute of Humane Education's website. They have a lot of cool free resources for teachers, for students who want to adopt the solutionary mindset. Solana, on to you.
I can't believe I have to follow that, right? Zoe, thank you for the work that you do in the world. How extraordinary. I love the word solutionaries. How amazing. Thank you. Oh, it is difficult to follow that because I have such so much of my work is around actually creating the space and opportunities to hear other people speak. So Aman will know that it is rare for me to actually be the one talking. So Ryan, I'm going to do my best. A little bit of background on me is that I have spent the last 14 years, I guess before the last year happened, traveling the world, running retreats and programs and experiences for kind of leaders and teachers and pioneers who can really sense that a new world is wanting to come through. And so I've had an amazingly privileged experience to be in so many different cultures and perspectives, and to see and feel what it means to be human. And I'm still learning what it means to be human. And so I think what brings me to this conversation, kind of this conversation in this moment, and this much larger conversation about what is humane education, what kind of education system is most needed in this moment in time for the world that is, as Zoe beautifully said, a just and sustainable world that is really possible, or as Charles Eisenstein puts, kind of the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. All of my work is around creating the space for people to remember who and what we really are, kind of the quality of both our being and our doing. And so much of that is just around how can we remember what it's like to be human together in an interconnected universe, very much in co-creation with animals and nature and one another. And so all of the stuff of our stories and the ideas of who we think we are can relax, and we can actually meet in kind of the profound presence of our existence. It sounds a bit radical, but I guess that's what we are doing here today. And so the analogy I like to have is, how can we remember kind of what it's like to dance for the joy of dancing and live for the joy of living, instead of kind of always being in some distant future that we aren't actually present to, and how can we be fully present with one another now so that we can create from that place something more true and meaningful. And Aman will laugh at me because the words that I use most often, and Raya, you know this about me, are around love, and how can we actually remember love when we are looking at the education system and when we are rebuilding systems, and how can they be grounded in love. Yeah, I think I'll pause there because there's so much more, and maybe the last thing I'll say on that is just one of my favorite quotes is around, there's been so much celebration of the thinkers of our time. What about the great feelers of our time? And my sense is that our capacities to sense and feel are what have kind of been eroded a little bit. And how can we recultivate our extraordinary capacities to sense and feel, and the wisdom in our bodies and our sensing? And how can we learn with that? So that's a little bit about me, Rai, for now, and I'll pass back over to you.
That's beautiful. I love the idea of reinventing our education systems from a place of love. I love that. And Alana, I have to say, I have been in a couple of sessions that you facilitated, and I've learned so much from your amazing facilitation techniques. And I do want to talk about the role of facilitation in terms of humane education.
Thank you.
Now, Zoe, my first question for you is just so we can all understand. Like, I've worked with the solutionary education framework before. We've also worked with challenge-based learning, which is very similar. If I were a learner and I was going through a solutionary path, what does that look like? What is the learning journey, practically speaking? And how is it different from what we're doing in traditional schools?
Thank you for that question. And Ilana, that was so beautiful. Dance for the joy of dancing, and live for the joy of living. I loved that. And how perfect to bring up love in this context, because I left it out, and it is embedded in humane education. I mean, even the word humane implies all of these qualities of compassion and kindness and love. So thank you so much for bringing that, voicing that. So to answer your question about what is this process like, so it begins with really with that compassion and love piece, that what is going to motivate us to address and solve the challenges that we face, whether in our own schools, if a child is in school, or in their communities or their country or the world, is going to be caring about someone or something. And so the very first step in becoming a solutionary is identifying who and what you most care about, so that you can then address the problems that who and what you most care about is facing. And so for teachers, that would mean introducing topics in age appropriate ways to students and allowing them to discover what it is that they're passionate about and in terms of challenges to address. And then the next step is becoming investigators and researchers. So I think that we have a tendency to jump to solving the problem before we deeply understand the root and systemic causes of the problem, all of the stakeholders who are affected by the problem, both positively and negatively. So, generally, when we think of problems, we think of, oh, well, this is causing harm to this group. But there's a good chance that there are a lot of beneficiaries out there who are benefiting from either the problem itself or the systems that create that problem. So if we look at something like climate change and we look at the energy systems and the food systems and the transportation systems that are contributing to it, well, there are a lot of beneficiaries out there. So solutionaries don't avoid finding out who those beneficiaries are. Solutionaries are going to talk to all stakeholders. They're going to do deep research. They're going to understand the systems that contribute to that problem and how they're connected to one another. So, all of the systems that, for example, contribute to climate change, they're interconnected. It's not just one system. It's the political system, the economic system. They're all interconnected, and the education system. So once that research and investigation is underway, and those stakeholders um, have been connected with, then solutionaries are going to look for leverage points. Where is there a place in the system where a small force can have a big impact? And then solutionaries are going to look for solutions where there is leverage. And then they're going to choose to pursue implementing a solution that really fits with what they're good at doing and what they want to do. So there may be lots of leverage points and lots of potential solutions. And if you're a solutionary, you want to make sure that you're picking one of those solutions that you're going to enjoy and be good at implementing. Otherwise, you may not do it. And you're gonna find other people to collaborate with who may choose a different aspect or a different leverage point. And you can work together. And ultimately, after implementing that solution, you want to evaluate it and see what you can learn from it. If you weren't successful, why not? And the last thing I'll say about this process, and we have described this process as a 14-step process. We have a solutionary guidebook on our website. Again, that's humaneeducation.org. It's free. You can download it and follow this process. There's a student version or activist version called How to Be a Solutionary, and it's a shorter version than the teacher version, and follow this process. But one thing, the last thing I'll say is that um, you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. There could be some really great solutions that are already out there. There probably are, but they may not be implemented because of systems that impede their implementation. So, a solutionary approach could be to figure out a way to take an existing solution and make it spread widely. And other solutionaries are going to identify where there have been successes in other communities and then bring it to their own community. So a solutionary doesn't have to be some unbelievable innovator who is doing all of this from scratch. There are great ideas, and we can implement them in our communities, and we can spread them and all be solutionaries.
Amazing. I love that. I know at the School of Humanity, that's exactly why we put a huge emphasis on systems thinking in our curriculum. And I can totally vouch for this pedagogy. Having worked with it with students, I find that learners are so much more engaged with the learning experience, and they're so much more incentivized. when it's learning in order to better humanity rather than learning in order to get better grades. Now, Lana, coming to you, I do want to go deeper into this role of the facilitator. I think
Mm.
the
Me
future of
too.
education, yeah, the future of education is, moving away from the teacher being a transfer of knowledge towards a teacher being a guide and a facilitator, right?
Mm.
And I'd love to hear from you, what are the best practices with facilitating towards humane education, and what are some of the challenges you find?
Such a great question. I'm still learning, after 14 plus years of doing this, I'm still learning. To facilitate means to make easy, which I love. And there's something about creating the space for things to feel and be easy, things that might not necessarily be easy. And so for me, when I imagine facilitation, it is about creating the space for kind of the truth of what wants to happen, to emerge. And so in education, my fantasy and what I also see and experience is when spaces are created that, and I was almost going to say children, but actually, humans feel safe to play in, to fail in, to practice in, to be fully themselves in, become, as far as I can see, something that looks a lot like magic. When it's possible to create a space where failure is encouraged, what is possible on a creativity, on an innovation, on an emergence level is so profound. And so for me, the role of facilitator, whether that's, facilitator can be an individual, it can be an environment, it can be a group, it can be a parent, it can just be permission of a culture and context, which is how do we make learning easy and education easy? And that doesn't mean that it is free of challenges, but almost to allow the nature of who we are, which is we are natural learning beings. We naturally want to discover, we naturally want to play. How do we create environments for our nature to show up, and for it to have full permission to be who we are? And what I try and bring, but I'm also a very fallible human being. And so I will, I make wonderful mistakes in doing this, which is when people have permission to be themselves and are relaxed in that, something else wakes up. And the way that I know how to do that is the more permission I give myself to be myself, the more permission whoever I'm working with has to be themselves. And so if I am stressed or contracted or pretending to be a version of myself that I'm not, that is kind of what I am then unintentionally inviting in the other. Whereas if I am giving myself total permission to be who I really am, that becomes an invitation for who I spend time with. And so when I work with students of all ages, there is something about my great joy, the thing that brings me most alive, is watching somebody remember who they are and the light in their eyes come back online. And so for me, when I imagine facilitating this humane education, it is how can we get that light back in all of our eyes? For me, that's where like the secrets are. Um, that's where our kind of our aliveness lives. And if we create from that place, naturally, we are creating more beautiful systems, that are in service to the whole system as opposed to just the few. I don't know if that answers your question, right? That's what happened.
Beautiful. Yeah, it does. I do also think a lot of the best facilitators and educators are present, and they're able to
Mm,
really go beyond just, being in a default state, and that has a huge impact on the energy in a classroom, virtually or
mm,
in person. And I think that's something you do really well in your sessions too. Now, Zoe, I know me and you both share a lot of frustrations with the traditional education system and with the mainstream education system. And a question I often like to, ask leaders in the space is, if you had to pinpoint one bottleneck in the entire system that you feel like is inhibiting transformation, inhibiting innovation across the entire education system, what would you think that would be?
Oh my goodness. And I realized I sort of dodged the question last time because you did ask me how how this would be different from the education system. One thing, oh my gosh. Honestly, I feel like we need to toss the whole system out and reimagine almost every aspect of it. So it will be hard to just pinpoint one. I think um, the idea that we have separated out curricula into these discrete categories, math, science, language arts, um, the fact that we then force students to sit for arbitrary amounts of time indoors um, with a teacher, facilitator, whatever you want to call that person, in front of them, delivering knowledge. It's an archaic system for today's world. And almost every aspect of it is archaic and needs to be reimagined. And so the reason why I think that the solutionary approach is a important corrective, and boy, I am really appreciating everything that you are saying, Ilana. Um, it's such a beautiful compliment to what I'm saying, which
Mm.
feels, as I'm listening to you and as I'm hearing myself speak, it feels like the attitude that we bring to the learner to allow that true person to awaken. Also, to me, if one is going to be a facilitator of learning, it's one's job to love the learners, which we know is not always easy with every single person. But the degree to which we can elevate ourselves to love every person who uh, we are perceiving as a learner, who we are trying to nurture. I think that's really, really critical. And then this this idea of educating solutionaries is really in some ways based on the reality that we live in a world that is both bad and better. Um, in other words, we face potentially catastrophic problems in the world. We have so many issues to address, and at the same time, so many things have gotten and continue to get better, even as we are seeing these terrible things unfolding, whether it is war and conflict, or it is racism and homophobia, or it is animal cruelty and environmental destruction. There are all of these problems, and yet I mean, I'm about to turn 60 years old. I can see in my own lifetime the progress we've made, and so until we get to that point where we have created really a just and sustainable and humane future, I do believe that the solutionary approach, if we bring that to the educational prospect and we say, let's throw everything out and let's say, here are our challenges. Which challenges do you care about as a learner? And let's use all of the pieces of thinking and loving and doing that we can in service to creating that better world. That feels to me like the right educational approach for our time.
Beautiful. That's so well said, and I couldn't agree more. Now, I'm conscious we're hitting the 30-minute mark, and we do want to open it up to the audience and hear your perspectives and questions as well. So, my final kind of wrap up questions to both of you is I know I can see a few teachers and educators in the audience. Um, who are some of your favorite either thought leaders, thinkers, authors, any particular resources that you rely on? Any really things that you can share with the audience that you think we should look into? Is there anything you would like to share? You can start with Lana.
It's such a big, beautiful question. I might need a few days, but I will go. I'll try. Um, I mean, I would dive deep into like more the philosophical, like an Alan Watts. I think that he's got such amazing wisdom and insight. Highly recommended there. Um, and Pima Chodron as well. And I think the other place I would go is so much of the amazing work that is being done on collective trauma at the moment. And you could look at Thomas Hubel's work. Yeah, anything that has information about how the body holds on to trauma, because I feel like it's such an unbelievably important piece as we move forward to understand what is in the collective consciousness, and how that trauma is going to influence the systems we make. That's a very quick answer, and I'll probably think about it for the next few days about all the things I could have said, Raya. So I'd love to hear Zoe's.
Oh my gosh. No, I think that's a really powerful point that I'm probably going to think about for a few days is how trauma has shaped our collective conscious and the systems that we live in.
Mm.
Beautiful. Zoe?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Uh, how much time do we have? Um,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
s- uh, some some people are on this call, like you, Raya, and Mark Prensky is here as well. I would say one of the people who I learn from every single day is my colleague, Mary Pat Champeau, who runs our graduate programs, one of the wisest people I know. She's not somebody who's written books, but she's somebody who is really a extraordinary and profound educator. Um, there are thinkers like Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens*, which is just a work of genius. Donella Meadows, who really is, in some sense, responsible for systems thinking as it's unfolded in many places. Um, John Taylor Gatto was one of the influencers of me in terms of education, as was Paulo Freire. And Jane Goodall was one of the earliest humane educators, a scientist who
Mm.
then decided she was going to devote her the rest of her career, the rest of her life, to humane education, and she's one of those thinkers as well.
I'm going to agree with all of Zoe's as well.
Yeah, those are excellent. Gatto is someone I came across myself recently for the first time, and his work on the hidden curriculum of schools is, I think, a topic we should have a whole session on at some point. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, guys. We obviously are still going to open it up to the audience now. I'm going to hand over to my co-host Aman to take over from here.
Sure, I will jump in. I feel like that one simple thing um, is is as simple as providing teachers with a different way of thinking about their curriculum. So if they're required to teach certain things, then how can we invite them to infuse those things with solutionary thinking and heart and action? And that is, in some sense, what we've been trying to do at the Institute for Humane Education is provide those avenues for teachers and schools to do that. And that's where our free lesson plans and our guidebooks come in. And we've just launched a solutionary micro credential program, which is a 30-hour online program. And it really enables a teacher to learn the concept, become a solutionary themselves, and then create a plan for integrating this into their classrooms. And that's the baby step for transforming the system.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to see those people I know and to meet those people I don't. Uh, I want to say, Raya, congratulations on your new thing. I just heard about the School of Humanity. And here's what I would say to the question at hand. There's a lot of thought in the world about reimagining and reinventing education. And Zoe just spoke about throwing almost every aspect of it out and reinventing or reimagining it. On the other hand, the things that we haven't thrown out that I've heard over and over again in this conversation are school, curriculum, learners, learning. So the concept of education as it was conceived through the 20th century, and it has a history, is still very much with it. And we keep thinking about how we're going to reinvent it. My question is, do we need to leave that behind as an artifact of the 20th century and invent something new? For which my candidate is empowerment, but we can discuss that.
First of all, I completely and utterly love the concepts you guys are talking about. I feel like you guys you know, have been watching me. I don't know. I've had these exact same thoughts. Like I, the idea of solutionary, right? That's what it's called, solutionary.
Yes.
Yes, I love that concept. So I'm kind of working on this idea that I've termed humanization and organic intelligence. And in essence, the founding values of this approach to education is really in line with what you guys are talking about. Some of the things I talk about is like centering on the whole child, not child centered, the whole child. Because if it's child centered, as Gert Biesta says in his book, The Rediscovery of Teaching, he mentions that, if we focus too much solely on the child, then, that's going to create an egotistical child, a child full of, world destruction, really, because they're just going to be imposing their own will on the world. There's a lack of interdependence there, So Hoy is, as I call it, humanization and organic intelligence. Hoy curriculum would be founded on the idea, or Hoy values, Hoy principles, is founded on the ideas of, altruism, interdependence, and cultivating and convening with the limitless self. I'm going to bring into the fray a movie. Usually we don't, as academics and scholars, we don't really talk about movies as much, but it's more so books and articles. But there's this movie. It's called Limitless. It has Bradley Cooper, and basically the premise is that we don't use a full 100% of our brain, right? And I don't really subscribe to that idea. I think that we all have access to 100% of our brain, but we just need to know how to tune into our inner self. So in my mind, everybody on this call probably knows, different things like the spirit or intuition, subconscious, your inner self, inner child, any phrase. I feel like they're all kind of the same, pointing to the same thing, or at least something similar, the soul. And what we need to do as humans is learn how to tap into that. Like when you learn how to tap in, like I think that's what the movie Limitless is talking about, is like when you tap into your inner self. For any of you who have seen the movie, he can do anything. Like he can learn at such an increased rate. He knows exactly how to speak to different people depending on their personality types, what their like background is, what they're wearing. He can like make adjustments depending on what's going on. And just knowing what to do in every situation, like knowing what to say, like facing your fear. There is no fear, like it's beautiful, so that's one of the things I feel like education is lacking. We're focused way too much on production, right? Like neoliberalistic education. Are you kidding me? That's not cultivation. One of the things about being human is that we have to fully, cultivate that inner person inside of us and do that together interdependently. I could drag this on and I could really filibuster everybody else's time. I'm going to stop here. But yeah, that's my overall premise.
My pleasure, and it's a delight to be here with all of you. I'm listening to you from my office in my high school, just outside of New York City. I'm in between classes, and I thought I'd give you that context. I'm grading papers about Macbeth. um, Aman, I think that I'm going to use a couple frames that you've introduced. I'm going to take this last piece about community, and I'm going to connect it to something that I think you kind of called us, those of us who are here in the audience, and I suspect it's probably a part of your mission, looking at some of your background, looking at what is the next, what is the next big idea? And obviously, we're all looking for the next big idea. I think you mean something bigger than that, and I kind of want to cycle around to what Robert was talking about. What I'm hearing from a number of people, and frankly, what I'm hearing everywhere. Um, we are in a moment, friends. This is an inflection point in history. In fact, I believe that we are living in the most important, significant inflection point in the history of education. Um, when we look at how it is that we transmit information, how we come to know things, and how we bring younger versions of ourselves, we call them children, into our society, and we teach them language, we teach them reasoning, we introduce them to the sciences and to the maths. We show them the broad panoply of everything we've learned as a species. In our best schools, it's broad. We used to call the word liberal. We were talking about leaving the 20th century, Aman. We think about John Dewey, Horace Mann, who kind of set our understanding globally of what education is, it's obviously grounded in a lot of industrial fundamentals of how there's a single transmitter and everyone kind of learns the same thing. I heard, I'm not sure who was speaking about it. It might have been Raya. I'm not sure when I first joined the call, but how we're kind of trapped inside. We're in desks and we kind of need to throw the whole thing out. Well, we're going to throw the whole thing out. It's going to take some time. Humans are pretty lousy at throwing things out unless we're forced to with some sort of catastrophe. And COVID has done some really wonderful things amidst all of the horror and the terror of it, the awfulness of it. So I think that this inflection point is going to be juiced a little bit. But I think now to my point, the community piece, human relationship. We look for like the name of the next era. You know, we like the age of information. We like the age of machines. So we're all going to try to name the next thing. But what we are in is the age of relationships. And the thing is, we've always been in it. We're identified by our relationships. We understand ourselves through our relationships. And what my partner and I, Dr. Ryan O'Hara, he's a researcher and he's doing a lot of work on what we call efficacies in schools, student efficacy and teacher efficacy. What we keep running into, and I think everyone on this call that I've been listening to has been talking about, is about how we need to find meaning and purpose in what we do. And that meaning, I'm going to borrow some things. Robert, you brought up organic intelligence. Mark, you were talking about empowerment. That's what you want to bet on. Empowerment is the game, my friends. That's it. And it happens through authentic relationships that are predicated on a word called care, a concept called care, genuine care for each other, and we're really talking a lot more about it than we have been. And in our, here I am. I'm on a phone call. I'm on a clubhouse with a bunch of strangers, having a real connection. I've got names of people that I've written down. I'm looking you guys up. That's connection. Listening, learning, honoring, respecting, having conversations about everything from critical race theory to dismantling the patriarchy. All these conversations are fundamentally about more honorable and honest, caring relationships. And I believe that our education system needs to make this nominally important. And whether we're working in educational technology, I do a lot of work in Edtech and we're building products or services, or we're building schools, we're doing the work of actually building schools. We need to take the idea of care. We need to take the idea of believing in people. It sounds so soft. It sounds so woo-woo. We need to take it from the bottom of the page and put it at the top of the page. And then we need to direct our solutions, our solutionaries, to always include what care means. And care means authentic concern for somebody else's well-being, a respect for the position they come from, their perspective, where they're coming from. We write about how what you do is you begin with, I think you were talking about this, Robert, from this movie. I haven't seen the movie, but the idea that you know how to talk to anybody. Great teachers think about how something sounds as opposed to what they have to say. What someone else hears is more important than what I have to say. Well, built into that, that's a piece of our book. Built into that is just the fundamental idea of you care about how somebody else is experiencing something. So my contribution, and thanks so much for the time and the opportunity to speak to you guys in between my classes today. My contribution to this conversation is, I think we need to decriminalize care. I think we need to make that a word that we don't just leave to the sectors that are nominally about care. We are all in the business of care, and the more we direct our work, our product building, our services, and our communities towards it, we will see results, demonstrable, put on this Excel sheet results. And that's what I believe. Thanks so much for the time, everyone.
thank you, Aman, for bringing me up to speak here. And it's great to be in a room and hear the passion of Mike, Robert, Mark, Raya, and everybody else, of course, Aman, Ilana. Um, I was drawn into this room by the title, Humane Education. It sounds so novel, yet so simple, and so important, and so easily overlooked. As a social worker, I started my career in schools, and I noticed two things very quickly. Both were, both of which were very inhumane, in my opinion. Number one is the way teachers were overwhelmed and overburdened. Not a very humane way. We don't treat our teachers humanely enough. We keep giving them jobs, we keep giving them things to do, and without really clear direction or guidance of how to do them. The second thing that I noticed is by the time kids were brought to my attention, they were already struggling for a very long time. It was very obvious that kids would struggle and their struggle would go unnoticed. It would finally get on the radar and teachers would try a bunch of different things, which makes sense. You don't need to call in the reserves immediately. But if there was a way for teachers to be able to identify kids that were struggling and deal with them in a way that was just simple so that it doesn't further overburden the teacher and really understands that when kids are misbehaving, that's actually their way of reaching out for help. Imagine somebody walking up to you and saying, "Can I have help? I need help with something." And the response is, "Well, we're going to deduct some points from your account because, this wasn't the deal that we made." It's not a very humane way of treating children. The ones who suffer the most are the disadvantaged children across the world. And so I set out to find a different framework, one that actually listens to the kids that are struggling and the way they reach out to us in interesting ways. They're not always going to walk up to us and ask us for help. They may act out. They may talk to their friend. They may get out of their seat. They may try to disrupt the class. But all these things are their ways of letting us know that something's not right. When things are good, when things are right, when kids are settled, they cooperate for the most part. That's typically how human beings are. When things are good, we kind of like to get along. We can get into a room like this and have a very civilized and deep, profound conversation, very filled with passion. But when our needs are not met, then we start to act differently. It's not because we want to be nasty or mean. It's just we're just trying to get through the day, and that's how a lot of these kids need to be treated. So I love the idea of having a conversation about putting humanity back into education, being more humane, seeing the people for who they are. The discussions that were brought up from the people that spoke previously are right on point. We need to connect with each other. We need to care about each other. We need to see the potential that our children have. We need to build them up as best as we can. So I'm glad to be here. I don't have too much time to spend, but definitely inspired by the conversation going on. And if I can contribute something, that will be a bonus for me. So this is Moshe, and I am done speaking.
May I add something quickly? Aman, may I add something? Okay. We've heard a lot of talk about children, the younger versions of ourselves, and kids, and those are words that I used to use a lot. I'm now starting to use the term people who happen to be young, which puts the emphasis on them as people. And I think for me, that was a huge shift in my perspective. And I think that seeing those people who happen to be young as students or kids or children or anything really is not something that helps us going forward into the 21st century.
Hello, guys. Good morning. I want to speak about equality in education. if we ask same question from people in different locations, for example, rich locations, rich cities, rich locates, or small towns, or different areas in the world, for example, we will ask how we can start a company or which documents is required for start a company. This is a general question, and we will find very different answers. For example, if you ask this question in rich locates of city, many people know the answers, and many people will research and search on their phones and find the true answers and say you. But if you ask this question in small cities or different areas, for example, in Asia or some areas in the world, people don't know and are not able to search. Let's start to teach any peoples from morning to night, any peoples around us. For example, any peoples from born to die, we have to teach peoples how they can search through and how they can to arrive to true answers and real sources. It will help us to pass the physical possibilities. For example, now, never we will not arrive to same school, same possibilities, same teachers with same knowledge. Never will not arrive to this situation, and never will not arrive to equality in education, and also never will not arrive in to economy, equality in economy, and also peace. And it's not difference. Problem is outside of our borders or outside of our city. For example, now we see the export statistics of United States. It's very different in big cities and in rich areas. People are able to produce good quality and packing and export direct. And in other areas, people cannot find very, very simple answers to questions. Thank you for listening my aspects.
Well, this is Zoe. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I really learned so much from everybody who spoke today. And I'm feeling, I'm not feeling like I have some profound closing words, except to say that, to reiterate that even if we want to throw out the whole school system, right now we have, and we want to and name things differently. Right now we have a situation in which we have schools and we have students and we have teachers and we have curricula. Um, and I believe that all of us need to address this system as solutionaries, which means that we need, as people in this group and other people who are concerned about education, we need to cultivate our own ability to think and act like solutionaries, to look at the root and systemic causes of the educational system as it is, and to find the leverage points and find the strategies to create the changes that we think are essential to move us forward. I couldn't agree with Mike more about the times we are living in, about what we can take from the pandemic to transform education. And so let's think like solutionaries. And if the Institute for Humane Education can be a resource to those people in this clubhouse right now, please go to our website, humaneeducation.org. So much that you'll find there is free and accessible and shareable, and we hope you'll use it. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
I also just want to say thank you. I think to probably amplify the words of care and relationship, and just what it's like to spend time in a room with people with such kind of open minds and hearts and insights. And I think the one thing that I feel is a wonderful loss that I think maybe we can do next time is they're probably one of the wisest people I know is Raya, and maybe next time I can interview you, Raya, because I feel like you are such a profound treasure trove of wisdom and insight and love. So yeah, thank you everyone, and just I feel quite touched about the work that's being done just of the people in this room. So thanks for having me.
Oh, lovely. I'm honored. Thank you, Lana. I've learned so much from everyone today. I think if there's final words I want to share, it gives me a lot of optimism and hope to see so many people aligned with what needs to change. I hope we all follow through and actually do change. So, let's set up those collaborations. Check out the Institute of Humane Education. Check out Lana's work. She has her website up, lanawebsler.com. Use the frameworks. Let's actually take what we've learned today and implement it in the education system in whatever shape or form. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. Well,
Before you guys head out, I, just as you said, I want to make it very known. I will be reaching out to all of you, everybody, all the speakers, all the and anybody else that I heard talk. I will be reaching out to all of you because I think that once we collaborate, as you guys were just saying, we can kind of create those new solutions. And really form that mastermind group that'll bring about a new future for education. So thank you again for having this room. This is great.
amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Robert. We're looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, see you guys next week, everyone. Follow us on social media. We're doing these events weekly at the same time. So I'm just going to close off the room now. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.